I ain't proud to say it, but that night at Vale House, I refused to cross a door like it carried a curse. Folks laugh when a cowboy admits he wouldn't enter a room, yet that's how the trouble started, and that's how I'll tell it plain. The sign out front said, Seraphine's Boarding House. Paint pale as moon milk and letters fine, like something out of a church ledger. She stood on the porch in a cream dress, too clean for this dust-battered county, skin like porcelain lamp glass, catching the last gold drip of dusk. Behind her the hallway ran cool and narrow as a creek under rock. And me, well, I was that stubborn cowboy who refused to enter the room, and my dog would be the one to reveal a $200 million secret none of us saw coming.
Please support us by subscribing to our channel and let us know where you're listening to this story from.
You figure I'm coding it with fancy talk. I ain't. My name's Bill Maddox, and I make my living between cattle and odd jobs. Keeping to the quiet lanes, trading shade for shade. I don't spook easy. I've slept in barns that creaked like ship timbers and laid out under skies so black buzzards could have been stars. But the way that hallway felt cool as a root cellar, though the night ran hot, gave me that tightness you get right before the first lightning clap. The air was full of the soap smell Seraphine liked and the iron pipe tongue that rides old houses. My shepherd ranger eased forward and froze at the threshold of room 11, nose down to the crack under the jamb, breath held like he was listening through his teeth. She laughed low, like she didn't want to scare me off by laughing loud. You won't be the first to balk at that threshold, she said. 3 drummers from St. Louis turned white and slept in the parlor. One gambler from Abilene insisted the door breathed at him through the keyhole. She said it easy, smiling a little, but worry rode behind her eyes like a horse you could hear but not see. Ranger had already found the seam where the threshold didn't quite meet the floorboards. He put a paw on it, tapped twice, then looked up at me with that old question of his, "You readin' what I'm readin'?" I tested the seam myself, loose. The old house carried a draft, but the air that pushed out from under that door wasn't moving with the rest. I swear it came slow as a long blink, cooler than the hallway, and it had a smell I knew from bad barns. Glow paint and low-grade kerosene. Not ghost smell, not grave lily cold, just the stink of a trick dressed in Sunday clothes. Sheriff Calder showed up not long after sundown, hat creased just so, coat brushed clean in a way that said he did it himself. Honest man, square as a fence corner. He listened while Seraphine told it. She never once called it a haunting. She just spoke on customers being troubled by oddities. A teacup clacking by itself in the sink, a wick dimming and flaring twice, a picture frame tilting for no reason. Sheriff asked, did we have enemies by name? She said there was Morton Holley from the county bank, who'd as soon measure a widow's porch for his own shoes as shake her hand, and an old topographer who hung around the back pasture like he'd lost a map and meant to find it under our feet. I told the sheriff I was set to watch. He smiled that tired lawman smile and said, if you won't go in, you'll at least take the night by the jail. I said I would, and Ranger thumped his tail like a deputy who'd just been sworn in. We laid a blanket in the hall. Seraphine set down a plate of ham and biscuits and a little blue bowl of water for Ranger that belonged, she said, to her late mother. The bowl had a ring of tiny cornflowers around the lip housewoman pretties in a hard county. She left us with a nod and a light touch to the doorframe, like she was greeting an aunt who turned difficult with age. This is where I tell you what happened to make me more stubborn about that room than a mule about a new bridge. The wick in the hallway lamp did a slow fade, then brightened as if someone breathed on it. The floorboards under me sighed. A tap came from inside room 11. 1, 2, 3. Then the soft slide of a metal thing sounded like a little blade against the old brass knob. Ranger lifted his head, ears needle sharp. He didn't growl. He listened like a banker to coins. He stood, padded forward, and set his nose to the gap under the door. His tail went still as cedar. I put my palm to the door. Cool. The knob, though, was warm from another hand recent that wasn't mine. I looked at the keyhole. In the dusk of it, a pale smear hung like a sliver of snow. I touched it with the edge of my knife. It smudged. paint that held light from lamp or day and gave it back in the dark, that old trick used by pranksters and birdcatchers. The back of my neck settled. No ghost, I said. A man. Ranger tilted his head the other way, as if to say, keep talking, boss. I'm with you. If you ever kept a German shepherd, you know that sound they make in the throat when an idea is almost formed. He made that. Then he tapped the seam again and turned, watching the far end of the hall. I listened and caught it, a tiny breathy peep, not much louder than a mouse asking a favor. It came not from the room, but from the stairwell up high, like through a reed. Sheriff heard it too. He put a finger to his lips and motioned us toward the stairs. We followed the sound through 2 turns and a low attic hatch that smelled of cedar and wasp paper. The noise got plainer, a little whistle. We found it tucked behind a rafter, a mouth harp reed set in a scrap of pine, rigged to a piece of gut line that ran down through holes in the lath, past the second-floor wall, and into the space above room 11's door. Somebody could stand on the back landing and pull that line to make a breath sing where no breath belonged. We got us a theater, I said. Sheriff nodded once, the way honest men nod when a lie has finally showed its shoelaces. Question is who sells the tickets. We traced the line down and found, in the space where the doorframe met the plaster, a smear of that glow paint summer berry pale, and a notch where somebody had rubbed a little coal oil into the wood to keep things sliding easy. I showed Seraphine. She didn't curse. She just pinned her hair tighter and said, Morton will be here again in the morning. Her voice had a stillness to it that made me want to ease the world for her, like when you see a thirsty mare and lift the bucket your own self. I didn't enter room 11 that night. No sense closing a trap you haven't mapped. We camped by the jam. The hall kept those strange drafts, cool where the rest felt warm, as if some belly of the house breathed its own way. Every time the wick faded, Ranger leaned his shoulder to me, and every time it brightened, he eased off again, like he was timing my breath with the lamps. Near midnight, we heard a gentle clack from inside, like a teacup touching saucer. I put my ear to the panel and caught the faintest ring you get from china set down, not by hand, but by thread. The second odd thing came when the portrait of Seraphine's grandfather, hanging caddy corner, shifted by itself in the lamplight and pointed downhill as though the whole house had tilted. It was balanced on a nail, so near the brink that a breeze could have done it, but there wasn't a breeze. I cupped flame to paper and ran a page past the crack, watched the way the smoke pulled. The draw ran into the wall, quick and curious, like a rabbit into a briar. I rapped once with my knuckles. The answer came back hollow, like knuckles on a gourd. Sheriff wanted to pry the panel then. Seraphine laid a hand on his sleeve. Morning, she said. Men who fake ghosts hate morning more than bullets. She was right. I've learned that truth a dozen times. Daylight breaks more spell work than any prayer I know. We slept in watches. Me and the sheriff trading the blanket, Ranger refusing to sleep proper at all. He took little dog naps with one eye half open and his chin on his paws. And every time the house settled, he made that quiet HM that means he's writing something down in the book he keeps in his head. Dawn came dusty and kind. We drank coffee gone bitter and watched the sun reach the porch steps. As it came up, the blue bowl with cornflowers caught a flare of light small, bright, sweet, and I thought, this is what a house looks like when someone tends it. Morton Hawley arrived in a black carriage with nickel trim that flashed like a tooth. He stepped down in gloves and a grin, the kind of grin that says, I own your tomorrow and will rent it back to you. He tipped his hat to Seraphine and sniffed the air like the house stank of failure. He made a show of concern. Miss Vale, I do hope you had a peaceful night. Odd reports keep finding my ear. His eyes ticked from the dark of the hallway to the number 11 on the door, then to me and the sheriff and the dog, like he was arranging pieces on a board. Peaceful enough, I said. We heard a reed sing in the attic and a teacup move itself, but otherwise quiet. Halle laughed too quickly, a little popgun laugh. Country charms, he said. Old houses do talk. He put a hand on the knob of room 11 like it belonged to him. I watched his fingertips. Under the lamp glow, I saw a pale powder clinging to the edge of his glove. Ranger stepped in and sat right at his boots, looking up. If you've never been stared down by a shepherd with questions, I recommend staying honest. Hale shifted, froze, and drew back his hand. I don't like dogs, he said to no one in particular. Dogs don't like theater, I said. He smiled again, but it went nowhere near his eyes. That's how the first night at Seraphine's went, and why I wouldn't cross the threshold yet. I've learned not to spring a trap until a man shows you the chain that leads back to his hand. Ranger already had his nose on it. He kept looking at the lower left of that jam, like it was breathing slow. I promised him out loud, we'll open it when the sun tells the truth, and he thumped his tail polite. Out here, a man learns to trust his dog same as he trusts clean water and good light. And when water, light, and air start acting trained, you watch the man holding the leash. Seraphine looked at me like she could see the map in my eyes. If it is a man and not a ghost, she said quiet, why keep it to the door? Why not take a hammer to the house? I told her gentle that a hammer leaves evidence, but a draft leaves a story. Men like Cowboy buy stories cheap and sell them dear. You can scare a price down quicker with a whisper and with a wrecking bar. By noon I had chalked 3 X's on the floor where the cold bled fastest. Ranger approved each mark with a nose touch, like a foreman signing a tally. We ate sandwiches thick with pickle and ham, and the dog took his share with a dignity I wish I had. Afterward, I checked the key plate screws with my thumbnail. The plate moved, not much, but enough to shiver when the line ran. Someone had loosened it to sing at night, and then cinched it just shy of honest. Ranger, I said, keeping my voice low, you tell me if the house breathes wrong. He set his jaw like a soldier and kept watch on that lower left corner where the jam had the odd gap. If you ever need a lesson in attention, watch a shepherd staring at wood. We made our beds in the hall before sundown. I strung a thin bell wire across the stair run, so light that a moth could have played it. Sheriff Calder signed his name inside my hat brim as a joke in case my head went missing. And we traded the kind of country stories men tell when they mean to keep one another awake. Seraphine brought a pie she said turned out ugly and tasted fine. It looked handsome to me. She placed 2 plates on the blanket like we were Sunday cousins and wished us a quiet shift. I kept my word to the door. I didn't cross it. A man can be brave and still be careful, and sometimes careful looks like balking to a stranger. That's the truth of cattle and men both. I watched that painted number on the panel 11 like it might blink, and when the lamp did its slow dim trick, I said my piece under my breath. Cowboy refused to enter the room. Fine, let the room invite us out. Ranger wagged once, then went still, as if the whole county's news had paused on his nose. Night held its breath, and we held ours too. I kept my hat low and my mouth lower that next morning, because a house will tell you more when it thinks you ain't listening. Seraphine's cream dress drank that light like milk, and she stood there steady as a fence post, watching me and Sheriff Calder check the jam of room 11. Ranger had already stationed himself with his chest square to the lower left corner of the door, nose hovering over the scene like a bee working a blossom. He wasn't fussed, not even excited, just focused. That dog has a way of looking at something till it gives up a secret out of pure politeness. I said plain, I still refuse to enter this room. Not till I know why the air under it moves wrong. Seraphine nodded, a brave nod with worry under it. Then we'll let the room do the talking, she said soft. She brought coffee in blue cups and set one down on the floor for Ranger, because he drinks like a gentleman. He put one paw near the saucer, but didn't touch it. His eyes never left the seam. Morton Hale hung back by the parlor mirror, turning his gloves by the fingertips, like a man considering which hand to dirty. He told Seraphine the bank could relieve her of burdens, that the old place was a lady with tired bones and ought to lay down. She thanked him like a schoolmarm thanks a boy for sweeping kindly, but with a look that checks the corners herself. Hale noticed the chalk X's I had marked and smiled a small lawyer smile. Drafts, he said. They travel through country houses like gossip. I told him, gossip leaves tracks if it's worth anything. He didn't answer, and his grin went thin. We started with touch. Wood will speak to a fingertip, same as a calf chooses a hand. I pressed the stile and rails, listening for that hollowness again. There it was, soft as a drum under a quilt. Calder held a match, and I watched the smoke lean, not out, not in, but sideways, toward the hinge side where the plaster had a hairline crack. Ranger followed the smoke with his nose and made a tiny sound in his throat, that librarian noise he makes when a thought is almost shelved. The first clue showed itself where most show right, under a careless hand. The brass keyplate wore a faint bloom that didn't belong to honest tarnish. I scraped it with my knife. The smear came up pale as a night flower, glow paint. Old kind, made by folks who think a lamp can be turned into a haunting if you give the shadows something to chew on. It glimmered on the blade and then faded like it had changed its mind. Seraphine leaned close, and the little freckle at the edge of her lip small as a sesame seed tensed with the rest of her face. She takes bad news like a lady, I remember thinking, by standing straighter. Second clue came in on the breath of the house. That reed sound from the attic puffed twice pip. P-I-P, and Ranger raised his ears, but never moved his feet. We followed the sound up the back stair. Steps soft, air cooler, plank knots looking back like old eyes. The hatch scuffed open, and the attic gave us the smell of cedar and sour dust and a note of kerosene, thin as last week's tea. In the rafters, tucked tidy, sat a pine block with a little metal tongue, gut line tied to it and running through bored holes down the inside of the wall. Pull the line on the landing, and the tongue would sing above room 11, but the singer would be somewhere else entirely. Cheap parlor magic, dressed in moonlight. You're telling me a man's been walking my back landing at midnight? Seraphine asked. I'm telling you somebody's been trying to rent my fear, she added before I could answer, and I felt a smile touch the edge of my mouth. Calder cut the line with his pocket knife, coiled it on 2 fingers, and put it in his coat. Things that talk out of turn, he said, ought to do it in front of a badge. We climbed back down, and I took to my knees at the baseboard, where the skirting met the jamb. The paint along the lower left had the tiniest wave to it, a ripple no taller than a whisper. Wood swells and shrinks in a life, but this wasn't that. This was somebody easing a panel back and forth to make a draft pace at a chosen spot. I worked a thin sliver of brass under the edge and felt it lift. Ranger leaned in so close his whiskers brushed my knuckles. Behind the panel I found a narrow chute that ran into the wall void, black as the inside of a crow. A smell drifted up cheap lamp oil, rubbed into wood like a lotion. Oil travels. Oil invites dust. Dust shows maps. In that dust was a finger mark, oval and proud, and set into it tiny crystals like battered sugar. Third clue, I said. Somebody's been powdering their tricks. I pressed a bit of the crystal between finger and thumb, felt it catch the light, and let it go. Phosphor dust, used by folks who sell wonders in saloons after the card game, empties the room. It kisses lamplight by day and returns it by night, honest as a mule comes home when the oats are right. Ranger sneezed twice, offended, and sat noble again, like a judge clearing a throat. Seraphine brought a handkerchief as white as a first page and held it open. I dusted the crumbed glow off my blade into it. She looked at the small pile like it was a stranger's calling card. I keep my rooms clean, she said, not angry, but iron flat. Ma'am, I said, you do, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. A dirty house would hide this all day. Her eyes met mine, dark, bright, steady, and for a breath, the hallway smelled not of kerosene, but of lilacs that weren't there. Sometimes a person's backbone is a perfume. All that talk of ghosts had left me hungry for something honest. Ranger must have agreed, because he trotted toward the pantry like he'd heard Bacon call his baptismal name. Only problem was the pantry door wouldn't open at first tug, and when it did, it didn't open to shelves. It opened to horns. A billy goat stepped out calm as a Sunday deacon, chewing a length of curtain fringe he'd liberated from somewhere upstairs. He wore a stupid proud look goats get when they think they've solved the town. Seraphine put a hand to her chest and laughed, first true laugh I'd heard from her yet, and the whole house seemed to ease a notch. Calder said, well, there's your ghost in the attic. The goat winked, Or maybe I just wanted him to. He moseyed past me, tail switching, and nosed Ranger's blue cup like he meant to drink. Ranger put a paw on the cup and gave him the stare he keeps for men of weak character. The goat reconsidered his theology and joined the daylight on the porch. I set about tracing where a man might stand to pull on that line without being seen. The back landing gave 3 good angles. A broom closet door, never locked, I noticed offered a view across the transom of room 11. A man could hide in there, tug the gut line, and watch the keyhole bloom like a ghost mouth. I found 2 pale thumbprints on the closet jamb at shoulder height, right where a man braces when leaning to peer. Those prints were a faint dusting of the same powder, too neat to be chance. Morton Hawley, who had been so generous with his silence, reappeared with a folded paper he said was a new offer. He spoke to Seraphine like a minister who had brought a smaller god for household use. Market's turning, he said. Best to part with elderly properties before winter resets valuations. Seraphine took the paper and didn't unfold it. She set it on a table and pressed the corner with one precise finger. Market's turn because men go round, she said. This house sits still. Hale's smile cracked and mended itself, and in the tiny break, I saw his teeth go hard. He looked down the hall toward the number on that door, like he wanted to argue with a piece of brass. Ranger stepped between him and the hallway without making it look like stepping. Hawley moved his boot a half-inch to the side and pretended that had been his plan all morning. Calder said we'd make a record. He brought out his little leather notebook and wrote the time, the breeze, the position of the sun on the porch rail, the smell, kerosene faint, source unknown, and then he looked at me the way a man does when he wants the part he knows he'll laugh about later. I said, "A goat in the pantry, Your Honor." He wrote it down, deadpan, and closed the book. We took lunch at the kitchen table. Bread, thick sliced ham, tomatoes cut so fine the knife whispered, and a jar of pickles brined honest. Ranger laid on the cool tile between us, like a hearthrug that had decided to be brave. Seraphine ate little, not from nerves, just from that well-brought-up habit some women have of letting the table shine without making a speech about it. She asked me what I meant to do next. I said I meant to watch the house shrink night down to a small enough shape that the liar, who wore it, would have to step inside it himself. She nodded once, satisfied a plan existed, even if it still looked like a fence drawn in the air with a stick. Afternoon found me measuring the hall with lengths of twine, knotting the places where the draft curled back like a trout in a shady bend. I dusted the floor with flour near the closet and across the back landing where a man would stand to work the reed. If the night brought footsteps, the flour would remember, even if my eyes didn't. I set a glass lantern on the newel post, just low enough that a moving shadow would show itself against the stair wall. Ranger approved each notion with a single tail tap, as if he were the board and I the treasurer making my case. As sundown came on, so did company. The old topographer shuffled up from the lane, a man with skin like saddle leather left in a barn too long, hair yellow-gray, eyes that had charted more water than most men drink in a life. He tipped his hat to Seraphine with a deference he didn't give many. "Ma'am," he said, "I was wondering if that south pasture is truly yours come forever, or just yours come till the county says so." She answered sweet and cold at once. "Sir, I own what my father paid for and what my mother held when he passed." The topographer nodded like she'd confirmed bedtime and turned those map eyes on the well in the back lot. He had the look of a man who listens for water under noise and for money under both. I walked with him a piece, Ranger padding soft between us. The old man said a spring used to feed the well from far up Blue Mesa. "Water rises where rock tells it yes," he said, "and digs a memory when men forget." He knuckled his jaw and peered toward the pasture fence. I looked too and caught a glint at the fence post. Just a nail-head catching sun, maybe, or a bit of bottle wedged there by boys from town. No boys had been around, though, and the glint sat too deliberate for chance. I left it alone for now. A man learns to spare a secret the first day he wants it to feel safe around him. Back inside, the house cooled into its evening language. The reed wouldn't sing now that we'd cut it, but liars are fond of backups. I checked the teacup and saucer on the tray in room 11 without entering. Thread can slip a cup around without a man in the room if you set the weight right. I brought a candle near the keyhole and let the light leak in. Inside, the cup sat behaved. I shadowed the light with my palm and watched for any twitch in the shadow that a thread would give away. Nothing. Sometimes, when you trim a snake's tail, he waits to see if you'll cut again. Night found us in our same posts, me on the blanket by the jam, Calder at the far end of the hall over his notes, Ranger a dark steady shape with eyes like two embers set wide. Seraphine left us with pie and a smile that held a harder courage than any pistol I've carried. The goat bedded under the porch, and his slow chewing made a punctuation on the silence, like a man thinking between sentences. A lamp did its slow fade once around 10, and I whispered to it, "Not tonight." It steadied. A moth tapped the chimney glass and made a tiny bell of it. Ranger cocked an ear at the pantry, and then set it back down, content the sanctuary held. Close to midnight, a petal-thin draft curled out from the seam again, cool as cellar pears. I leaned and put my lips near the wood and tasted the air like wine. Oil, not much, and a sweetness like struck matches. Leave if you walk through the smoke of another man's choice. I opened my eyes to find Ranger looking up at me, as if to say, "You taste it too." I nodded once. "We ain't going in," I told him. "We're going to make whoever belongs in there come out." He laid his chin on his paws and watched the corner of that door the way the county watches the sky for rain. When the floor creaked one board only, down the back landing, we didn't move. The glass on the newel post whispered a quiver. In the flower, a soft half-moon print bloomed, the kind a heel makes when a man stops mid-step to listen to himself lie. I pointed. Calder saw it and didn't speak. Ranger's ears rose a notch, then settled. He knew the night had blinked. That was enough. Sometimes you don't chase a raccoon out of the corn. Sometimes you let him finish the row and follow him home at graylight. I shut my eyes right then and said a little prayer, not for safety, but for sense. Let me see plainly what's plain. And what ain't plain, let the dog find it first. When I opened them, the hallway looked ordinary again, which is to say holy, which is to say the kind of place where truth likes to sit for a spell before it climbs on a wagon and rides out for the next town. "Tomorrow," I said to the room I still refused to enter, "you're going to give me your name." The number 11 on the door didn't answer, but the boards gave a kindly sigh, and Ranger's tail tapped twice like a judge granting a motion. Morning poured down the lane like clean wheat, and the house took that light slow as a cow stepping into a brook. I woke with splinters in my back that told me we'd kept honest watch, and with Ranger already sitting up, ears tall, nose pointed at that same lower left corner of room 11, like a weather vane that had chosen one wind for life. I had said plain the night before that I refused to enter that room, and the promise still held like a knot in rawhide. A man doesn't cross a line until he understands who drew it. A dog don't need the reason, he just reads what the air wrote. Seraphine came down the hall in that cream dress again, a starched grace against the battered boards. She had braided her dark hair high and tight so her neck shone like river stone in sun. She set a plate with 2 biscuits and honey between me and Ranger without a word, then looked at the brass number on the door as if it were a school sum that refused to add up for the 3rd day running. Sheriff Calder joined us with his hat in his hands. "We'll take it gentle," he said. "Truth don't favor a hurry." Ranger thumped his tail once, then went still as a fence post. First, I rapped the jam with the butt of my knife and listened. Wood will answer you if you ask decent. The answer came back hollow, as before, but not honest hollow. It sounded thin the way a drum does after somebody's tightened one lug and left the rest to guess. I pressed my ear to the paint and breathed with the wall. Ranger leaned beside me, nose to the hair-thin seam where paint met baseboard. His paws went still, like he was choosing a word careful. Then he tapped once with his nails, very soft, as if he'd written a period. "Right there?" I asked him. His tail tipped once. I worked a brass shim under the paint edge. Old horsehair plaster isn't precious. It's practical, the kind of practical where folks mix tail and Maine into lime to keep a wall from cracking when winters talk mean. The shim lifted a whisper. The paint flexed and sighed like quilt batting, and cool air slipped over my knuckle, more a whisper than a draft. In that air rode the same faint kerosene and that foxfire powder smell that pretends to be moonlight in the dark. I fetched a slim chisel from my saddlebag and eased it in polite as a guest asking for more coffee. Seraphine stood over me, quiet, her palms together under her chin like she was saying a prayer without moving her mouth. Calder kept time with the building. When the house creaked left, I pressed right. When it settled, I let it finish speaking. The goat under the porch sneezed once, and the whole place seemed to bless itself. The panel gave without a fight. Behind it yawned a wall void dark as a dug well. The air in there had an old paper smell and a little mint of mouse. I slid 2 fingers in, then my hand felt along a rough lath and touched the corner of a packet wrapped tight in oilcloth. I don't mind telling you my heart chose that exact moment to remember its job. I worked the packet free. It came out slow, stubborn, then hungry for light, and I set it in my lap. The oilcloth had been sealed on one side with red-brown wax, pressed by a notary ring that had cracked with the years but kept its teeth. "May I?" Seraphine asked. "It's your wall," I said. She broke the brittle wax with her thumbnail and undid the oilcloth with a care that made the air stand still. Inside lay a folded map, blue-lined and tissue-thin, and a sheaf of papers full of handwriting that walked the page like it knew exactly where it meant to go. The top line read neat as Sunday: Blue Mesa Hydraulic Survey and Supplemental Sessions, 1902. Calder whistled through his teeth. "You know what you're looking at?" he asked. I shook my head like a man who suspects and would rather be told. "Those are rights," he said. "Water rights and maybe brine mineral rights besides. If they were signed correct and filed once, even a long time back, they're still bones of the law. If they weren't recorded, they're still bones somebody meant to hide." Seraphine sat down on the hallway runner because her knees asked her to, and she smoothed the map flat by the corners with the pads of her fingers. The map showed Blue Mesa and the cuts under it like a lung drawn by a quiet doctor. A dotted line traced a subsurface seep from the high rock to the side of her pasture. Not just a seep, too. A man had taken pains to mark the pressure heads, and the way winter snowpack translated to spring rise at the well. In the margins, a dry pen had written the name Vale more than once. And not as neighbor, not as complaint, as a beneficiary. My mouth went dry like I'd eaten dust. We weren't just chasing a liar. We had stepped on a money vein. Beneath the survey sat 3 instruments with seal imprints, one for access, one for extraction, one for an option if mineral brine ever made the county take notice. Each bore signatures from men dead and a name still living. Morton E. Halle, typed ugly and added later in an ink that didn't match. The way that ink sat on the paper skating the fibers instead of drinking told it had been penned after the paper's prime. "Lord," Calder said, soft, "if this is what it looks like, somebody aimed to turn your trouble into a 40-mile money river." I said what we were all thinking even if we dressed it different. In my math, today, that'd tally high 200 million if it went the way men in tall chairs like it to go. My voice didn't fit the numbers. Out here we count calves, not millions. Still, truth don't blush at any scale. Ranger sniffed the papers, and then the oilcloth, and then the little hollow again, like he was cataloging the day in his head. He sneezed once, offended on behalf of the house. Seraphine smiled at him. "You found me a fortune I didn't know I'd lost," she said. He looked back like, "Ma'am, I only pointed." We kept our hands honest. Calder spread his handkerchief on a little hallway table and made a neat parcel of what we had. He set his badge on top of it, like a paperweight with teeth. "Until a judge sees my custody," he said. No one argued. I replaced the loose panel gently, not to hide what we'd found, but to keep men who lied from getting ahead of the clock. When I pressed the paint back to meet the baseboard, the house let out a breath that felt less troubled. It's a strange thing when boards approve of you. You feel taller without moving. Halle chose that moment to return, as if some wire under the county seat had buzzed in his pocket. He came up the steps, like a man expecting his hat to be taken by the air. He looked taller than he had in the morning, and at the same time smaller, which is a trick certain men perform when they think they've taught you a lesson you ain't learned. He saw the bundle on the table and the way Sheriff stood between it and the sun. "What's all this?" he said in a voice polished to be harmless. "Housekeeping," Calder told him. "A house keeps what it needs." Hale's eyes slid to the number on the door, then to the panel where my chisel had kissed paint. He smiled with half his mouth. "Old houses fall apart when strangers pry." "Some fall apart when friends pry," I said. "Depends what was nailed wrong in the first place." Seraphine rose, tall as a flag. "Mr. Halle," she said, "have you ever stored personal effects in my walls?" He blinked. "I wouldn't know where to begin," he said, and then tripped on his next word and had to repeat it so we'd forget the stumble. Ranger stood up and went to him like a church elder walking the aisle, unhurried, certain. He sat at Hale's boots and looked up with those steady eyes. Halle made the mistake men make when they don't like a mirror. He stared back. Ranger broke eye contact first, not from respect, but to sniff Hale's glove. He sneezed twice, small and polite, as if returning a calling card the wind had brought. I liked the goat better than Halle that hour. The goat wandered in, nosed the newel post, and offered Halle a polite chewed cud breath. Halle stepped back like sin had touched his hem. "Keep your stable out back," he said. "I keep what's honest wherever it fits," Seraphine answered, and the little laugh that ran around the house wasn't unkind. We carried the packet to the front parlor for clean light. Calder read just enough dates, names, the old words that hitch property to water, then closed his book and said plain we had a lawful chain a judge could follow. No sermons, no crowing, just the sound of Ranger breathing and the sense of a house that had been holding its breath too long now taking one honest draw. I folded the oilcloth back around the map. Calder tied it with kitchen twine from a drawer. I signed my name on the twine with Seraphine's pencil as witness, and he put the bundle in his satchel under the flap. "We'll see a judge at first light," he said. "And before that, we'll pass by the courthouse to see what's missing that ought not be." Halle took a step like he meant to leave, and then remembered he hadn't said a threat yet. "This kind of excitement is bad for a boarding business," he offered. "Folks avoid places that entertain rumors." "Places survive," Seraphine said, "by entertaining travelers, not rumors." He tipped his hat. His eyes tried to make the room smaller and failed. Then he walked to the door where Ranger waited, and he hesitated because stepping past that dog felt like crossing a county line without paperwork. I patted my thigh once. Ranger got up and moved aside with more grace than the moment deserved. Halle left, and the day brightened by a degree you could measure against a nail shadow. We stood quiet till the carriage noises fell away. Then I said the thing that had been pecking my hat brim. "If someone hid that packet there, someone else will come at night for it." Calder nodded. "Then we let the theater reopen," he said. "Only this time the house sells us the tickets." Seraphine looked toward room 11. The number on the door had lost some of its bossiness, and the paint around the jamb seemed less like a mouth and more like a patch of dry skin ready for salve. I still refused to enter the room. That was the point. A trap needs an invitation. We aimed to make the liar write it in his own hand. We spent the rest of afternoon setting the stage for our midnight guest flower on the landing. A hair of bell wire across the stair, a mirror set to catch a wrong light, and a polished lantern chimney to write shadows bigger than lies. Close to full dark, hoofbeats braided with wheels sounded on the lane. Not hell too light, the old topographer came back with his hat brim, silvered by dusk. He didn't ask in. He took the side path to the well and stood a long time with his head tilted, like a crane listening for fish. I watched him from the back window. He raised one finger as if taking a note in the air, then turned without hurry and went away. Ranger did not growl. He watched the man go, as a shepherd watches weather, curious, never scared. By 10, the house had settled deep and low. The goat gave 3 sleepy coughs and surrendered to chewing dreams. The lamp dimmed and swelled once the reed cut. The trick half dead, and the draft at the lower seam brushed my knuckle like a moth wing. I told Ranger in a whisper only he could hear, "Tomorrow we'll open that door on our terms." He answered with 2 tail taps. I felt the map folded tight in Calder's satchel call, softly from the parlor, like a bird that had learned the name of its cage and wanted the morning to change it. Somewhere in the night, a train spoke from so far off, its whistle came thin as a hair. Seraphine's steps crossed the upstairs hall and stopped. Then stillness took the place, and we let the stillness know we were friends. I lay back on the blanket by room 11 and let the boards hum through my shoulder blades. I told the house we meant no harm, only light. Ranger shifted, put his chin on my boot, and sighed. That sound said more than any oath. We had a map, a paper chain, and a plan. All that remained was to hold our ground until the dark blinked. Toward sunset, the wind swung west and put a little red in the dust, the kind that makes fence wire sing in its staples. I took that as permission to tune the house. You can laugh, but a house has strings, and if you tighten or loosen the right ones, it will tell you what key the liar prefers. Ranger followed me room to room with a steady, businesslike gait, pausing to read corners, baseboards, and thresholds, the way a banker reads a ledger for missing cents. Seraphine watched from the hallway, with her hands folded neat and her dress bright as churned cream. She didn't flutter or fret. She simply stood, a pretty woman with a clear jaw and a steady back, and let the boarders of the day go about their foolishness. We began where fear had been cheapest to sell, at the upstairs landing that hovers over room 11's door. Earlier, we'd cut the gut line and pocketed the reed. Now I wanted to see if the man had left himself a second mouth. Most frauds do. Sheriff Calder handed me his pocket mirror, and I angled it down behind the cornice. In the glass, the upside-down world showed me a neat little pulley, black-painted, fixed under the mold. The gut had run through there, into the wall, then down to the closet knob, where a hand could pull and watch. I eased the pulley out with 2 screws and set it on a handkerchief, so fine it hated my hands. Ranger sniffed, sneezed, and sat his version of filing a report. Calder went through the broom closet boards with his pencil tip, counting holes. 1 hole had clean edges. The rest wore dust collars. The clean one smelled of kerosene breath. "Fresh," he said. "Somebody practiced his sermon last night." I checked the transom above room 11. The glass had a streak shaped like a finger pushed slow across dew. I wet my own fingertip, drew the same streak on the mirror, and watched the stray light bend where a man standing at the closet would see it and think the room drew breath. "Parlor magic," I said. "Sold in lots of 2, regrets not included." Downstairs, the kitchen door had a new nick where a latch had been lifted by a blade trimmer thin. Seraphine said she hadn't made that mark in any honest chore. Beside the pantry, a small tin of coal oil sat with its lid not quite square. Someone had primed the house for midnight. Ranger put a paw on the tin and looked at me, insulted. He takes it personal when a liar tries to train air. We went back to the hall. I re-chalked the floor square and laid a second bell wire, lower this time, soft enough to miss a careful boot heel, but catch a lazy toe. At the stair, I placed the mirror so the newel lantern would throw a ribbon of light across the closet crack. Any hand in there would have to cut the ribbon to work the trick. Calder wrote the time and the angle in his book. He has a bookish soul for a man who rides lonely roads, and I'm glad of it. Lone riders make the best listeners. An hour before full dark, a visitor we did expect walked in. Not Hale, the old topographer. He smelled of saddle soap and paper glue and carried his hat in both hands like it had confessed a small sin. "Ma'am," he said to Seraphine, "forgive an old mapman's curiosity, but did you ever happen to see a second well cap in your south pasture? A small one, iron, set about knee-high?" She considered. "My father called it a winter pipe. He said it wasn't to be touched." The old man nodded at the floor like she'd given him the answer to a riddle about rain. He flicked his eyes toward the hall table, where Calder's satchel lay fat with the packet, and back to me. "Sometimes," he murmured, "folks bury value to keep it safe and forget where they put the shovel." Ranger, who trusts slowly, decided then to extend a courtesy. He trotted off and came back with something in his mouth, a rectangle of pasteboard freckled with pale dust. He set it at the topographer's feet and stepped back. The card read, A. Pike, Surveyor. The topographer blinked. Abel Pike, he said. I worked with him. Once. He tapped the edge of the card and left a small print of the same phosphor dust that glowed on the key plate yesterday. He rubbed his fingers, troubled. This isn't honest dust, he said. This is theater dust. Seraphine led him to the porch for air. I watched their silhouettes, her profile clean as a coin cut and the old man's long nose like a ridge line against the light. When they came back, he asked to see the map. Calder let him look, but not touch at the top sheet. The old man's eyes tracked the blue lines with hunger and grief both. I made the first of these with Pike, he said. He was a better drinker than a surveyor. Morton Hawley paid then, too. Pike swore he filed the papers. I told him I'd see the clerk myself. I didn't, and that ate me in winter. He let the sheet drift back, and I saw his hands shake once, not from age, but from shame remembered. I asked him plain if he'd pulled strings in the walls at night. He fixed me with a look I wouldn't want to meet at a card table. Son, he said, I'll lie to save a widow's fence from a flood, and I'll lie to steal back a stolen river. But I won't keep a woman from sleep in her own house. Ranger accepted that and lay his head on the man's boot as if stamping a note paid. Morton Hawley arrived at last, shined and pressed, bringing a smile stretched so careful you could see the stitches. He carried a tin of sweet cakes like a hymnal, which is a good way to make neighbors out of men who ought to be witnesses. He set the tin in the parlor, then let his hand casually touch the satchel as he pretended to admire the mantel clock. The touch was soft, like a cat's paw, and just as sure. Ranger swept in between the hand and the satchel like a gate closing. Hawley laughed too fast. Dogs and I don't share languages, he said. You don't share much, I told him. He chose not to hear. He turned to Seraphine. I'm only here to check on your well-being, he said. A rumor reaches town that you've fallen prey to old wives' tales. She didn't even blink. The only tale that troubles me is the one bankers tell about kindness, she said. Her pretty mouth didn't smile, but her eyes lit the way lamplight warms a white wall and then refuses to go out. Hale's gaze drifted to room 11 and stuck there, as if the brass numbers were a stage cue he couldn't avoid. Folks get sick in rooms like that, he said. Rooms with bad airs. Calder friendly said, step in and see. Hawley said he'd prefer not to disturb the geometry. I thanked him in my heart for giving us the word he used in private. Once he'd gone, the house kept shrinking into quiet the way a puddle goes thin under wind. We checked the wires, the mirror, the chalk. I traced the glow dust where it had smeared fresh on the closet jamb, a faint comet tail new since noon. I touched it, brought the shimmer to my tongue, never advise it, but sometimes a man must, and tasted bitter tin and oil. Ranger looked at me with the same disappointment Seraphine wore. I've tasted worse, I told them both, and washed my mouth with black coffee. Night fell for true. The moon came hard white, the kind that erases stars and writes fences deeper. The goat settled under the porch with a thok that said his bones were satisfied. Seraphine closed 2 doors soft upstairs and did not lock them. Brave women don't lock every fear. They leave some ajar so truth can walk through without banging. Calder took first watch near the landing. I lay long by the jamb, hat brim angled so I could watch room, stairs, and mirror ribbon all at once. A little before midnight, the house took one of those deep flexing breaths old timber makes, and with it came a whisper against my cheek. The draft again. This time I followed it sideways with my palm to the baseboard opposite. A tiny click answered, the sort a mousetrap makes when you test its spring with a feather. I looked down and saw a hairline slot under the molding. A flat sliver of tin sat in it on a pivot. When the latch inside room 11 moved, the tin tilted and shushed the air outward as if the door itself sighed. I grinned even though nobody could see. You clever, lazy sinner, I said to whatever man had thought he'd invented wind. Ranger's ears rose and fell, agreeing. Calder padded down the hall, raising no louder than moths. He crouched, studied the slot, and whistled low. "Cybox," he whispered. "I've read of such and dime stories, and never met one built." We eased the strip out, turned it in the lamplight, and saw, stamped tiny on the metal, the mark of a tinsmith from Hale's own street. That alone didn't hang a man, but it made the rope. We put the Cybox back where we found it and wound a strand of my own hair long enough under my hat to do around the hinge pin, so that any turn would pluck it and tug my ear by way of the bell wire fixed to the other end. It's a funny thing to wire your head to a stranger's trick. You learn how intimate a lie can be when it shakes your skull first. We settled to waiting. The mirror ribbon held. The flower pan on the landing lay smooth as a page that hadn't learned its letters. Ranger dozed with both eyes half open, a talent he keeps for nights like this. The goat snored. The moon painted the hallway with small pews of light. I whispered to Seraphine through the door, not to the number, but to the boards. "You live here," I said. "We're only passing. I like to think old houses hear you and decide whether to side with your bones or not." The bell wire kissed my ear, a soft, private twitch, and the ribbon of light shivered. I didn't move, only my eyes. In the closet crack, a darker dark pressed forward and away. The latch turned to whisper, and two careful ovals printed into the flower, the kind made by a man walking his boot edges to cheat powder. A rod tip dimpled the dust between them, a balancing stick for bad boards. Ranger didn't bark. He lifted his lip just enough to show two teeth and let it fall again. Ledger closed. The keyhole breathed, and inside room 11 a teacup clacked once. I held the candle low and saw the soot-blacked thread glint thin as a horsehair running through a crack behind the wardrobe to the cup's handle. A tug on the closet side would make China speak where no one stood. Parlor magic, sold by the yard. Calder slid a pencil under the closet knob. It turned a hair and bit the cedar, then stopped, manners restored. I told the pine, quiet. Ain't no ghost in a county that knows pulleys. From the wall came a human sigh, annoyed that its trick had landed soft. We didn't rush him. I wanted the hand that wanted the satchel. It came. A second shadow passed the parlor threshold and reached polite as theft award leather. Ranger met it with his jaws and held like a farmer holds a gate in wind, firm, not mean. The hand withdrew. The breath behind it swallowed its cuss, and the flower took a half-sole print with a notch missing at the heel, not Hale's city leather, but a hireling's resoled work shoe. We marked it in our minds for morning. We reset small straw in the keyhole. Mirror ribbon nudged, bell wire cleared, and let the night knit itself. Near one, the Cybox under the molding breathed on its own, and a small tin reflector dropped from the frame and caught a low lantern shine, throwing a white oval face across the far wall. The thread twitched. The cup spoke again. Cheap magic finished its prayer to fear. Ranger had heard enough sermons. He stepped on the string where it ran to the closet, and the line sang false. The tin wobbled and clattered down. The closet drew a sharp breath, the first honest sound of the night. Calder said, calm as a judge, come out friendly or come out foolish. No door open. The straw fell. The ribbon brightened like a grin on a liar. We sat in the hall and told each other harmless stories until a knee banged a board and the stairwell boomed. That gave us all we needed: the order of tricks, the count of men, and a boot print with a missing notch. Let's give him a night off, I said. We stood up loud and talked about coffee. The closet stayed shut, the parlor empty, and the satchel safe under Ranger's chin. We left the stage as we found it, so the morning could walk in and tell us what it had seen. I looked at room 11 and kept my word. I did not go in. Some doors stay truer when you respect the edge. I tipped my hat to the number and to Seraphine's shadow at the upstairs rail and told the house we meant no harm. Ranger settled with ears at half-mast, ready to rise at the next wrong hymn. I pictured the map again, blue lines running, like veins toward pasture, and one name in the margin veil. Paper outlives enemies. When the clock risked the hour, the house answered with the smallest creak, old wood agreeing to be decent a while longer. I kept my promise to that door. I still refused to enter the room, even with morning smiling on the boards, even with the map safe under Sheriff Calder's keeping. Some men hear the word threshold and think it means try me. Out here, it means look twice. So I set my blanket where it had been, hat brim low, back to the wall. Eyes on the number 11, like a man watches a fence or a bull likes to test wire. Ranger took his old post at the lower left seam, chest square, ears up just enough to taste the slow science of a trick. His rib cage rose and fell in a careful count. You could set your watch by that dog when he fixed himself to a job. Seraphine was a clean brightness in that cream dress, dark hair pinned in a way that made her pretty neck read like a promise. She'd slept little. I could tell from the calm, tired folks make fewer sudden moves. She knelt by Ranger and smoothed his shoulders like she was brushing a saddle for company. "You keep the gentleman out of trouble," she whispered to him, meaning me. Ranger answered with one tap of the tail and went back to reading wood. We didn't have to wait long for the house to confess another trick. When the sun walked across the front parlor and struck the hallway lamp glass, a thin coin of light rolled over the jamb and sank into the seam. Right then the breath under the door cooled and the key plate exhaled like a mouth behind a hand. I slid my brass shim under the paint edge we'd opened yesterday. The panel gave easier this time. Liars grow lazy when they think their show is sold out. Behind it the little chute waited, wood, dust, foxfire powder. The same low-grade kerosene note came up like a bad memory that wanted to be forgiven and couldn't. It wasn't the chute that called Ranger. It was the ceiling inside the room. He lifted his head and stared up into the corners, past the keyhole, like he could see through lath. Then he looked at me and licked once, quick as signal for look higher. I stood slow so the floor wouldn't speak and raised the chimney of the lamp to throw light in a taller arc. In that new light, the plaster inside room 11 showed a faint pucker near the gas sconce. Nothing a tired eye would notice. Something a dog would notice. Hairline, puckered like a blister half healed. The sort of blemish a lazy man leaves when he tapes something to plaster and hopes paint will hide the sin. "I won't step in," I said aloud, "for the door and for the liar listening. Ranger will." He needed no second tell. He bunched, took a quiet breath, and hopped the jam like a deer clears a narrow ditch no rattle. No scuff, just 4 sure paws, landing in a square where I'd spread flour dust, thin as breath itself. His prints stood neat as stamps in the powder. He looked back at me for permission, and then eased a chair leg with his nose until the chair walked 2 inches under the sconce. He set his forepaws on the seat and sniffed the brass arm of the sconce. Then, patient as a carpenter, he nosed along the plaster until his teeth found a loose edge of tape and tugged. Something small rattled against metal and stuck. "Bring it," I told him. He did, proud but businesslike, and dropped the thing on my palm as if he were handing over a verdict. It was a key fob, nickel bright where the tape had kissed it, with letters struck small and formal, HEC pressed around a courthouse star, and tucked behind the fob, stuck to the tape, lay a square of brass no bigger than a biscuit button, an embossing seal head with a county crest reversed in it. The sort of thing a clerk presses into hot wax when he wants paper to shut up and obey. Seraphine's eyes went wide, then narrow, then steady. She doesn't spook at treasure. She sets her feet. Sheriff Calder weighed the fob on his palm and read it slow. "Holly Exchange and Credit," he said. "That's Morton's bank," before he got fancy and started calling every handshake a trust. He lifted the seal head with the tip of his pen like it might bite. "And here's a piece of the county's mouth riding in a private pocket." He set it back, careful as if he were laying a chick in straw. "You want to lie to a house," I said to the air. "You bring theater. You want to lie to a court. You bring a seal." The hallway heard me and kept its counsel, but the boards under my boots didn't like the taste of that brass, and I can't say I did either. I tied the fob and the seal head together into a handkerchief bundle and wrote my name and the hour on the cloth with Seraphine's pencil. Calder took the bundle, tucked it in his inner coat under the badge, and patted it once, like a promise he meant to keep. Morton Holloway arrived 5 minutes later, punctual as a collection day, and found us like that, me by the threshold. Ranger sitting square inside the room, as still as a statue of an honest dog. Seraphine, clean and tall, Calder with his hand close to his heart where the bundle lay. Hale's smile came first, his eyes coming last, and the two never met in the middle. "Morning," he said. "I do hope the situation has improved." He said, "Situation, like some folks say fever." "It has," Seraphine answered. My house caught a chill and then recovered its manners. She stepped aside and let him see the chair under the sconce, the flower traces, the dog. Hall saw more than he wanted to. His left glove twitched, and his right hand set itself on the newel as if it had forgotten how to hang honest at his side. Calder lifted the seal head between thumb and forefinger just high enough for Hale's nose to recognize its shape without letting his hands own it. "You ever seen one of these out of a clerk's desk?" he asked, mild. Hale didn't blink. "Hard to say," he said. "All such devices look alike to me." His voice dropped a half shade. "Better governments than ours have mislaid a few." He thought that last part was clever. The room didn't laugh. Ranger stretched once, slow, and set his paws off the chair. He walked to Hale and sat, eyes bright, ears level, that patient German shepherd look that says, "I can hold this for as long as you care to pretend." Hale looked down and found no purchase there. He turned that stare toward me. "I'm sure, Mr. Maddox, you'll agree this county cannot be held hostage by superstition." "I agree it shouldn't be held hostage by stagehands," I said, "and I prefer daylight for any argument." Hale left when he understood the morning had chosen a side. He didn't slam the door. Men like him don't. They close it like they're giving the world a favor and then wait for it to say thank you. The dust behind his carriage made a long, skinny curtain that the wind tried and failed to draw just right. Seraphine watched it thin and turned to me. "I hate that I'm wearing my Sunday dress for a Tuesday like this," she said, and a tiny smile got past her worry. "Ma'am," I said, "you're the only Sunday this house needs." We spent the heat of the day marking what a man would reach for if he came hungry in the dark. Calder's satchel with the packet, the key rack by the kitchen, Seraphine's account book, my hat. I wrote "no value" in pencil under the brim to save him time. We set the mirror again, wired bell to ear, dusted light with flour thin as a winter rumor. I polished the lamp chimney until it kept my face in it, so true, I almost trusted me. Ranger could sleep on a thimble and never spill it. He would drowse, snort once, and open one eye as if winding a clock inside himself. Evening brought the old topographer back, hat brim dipped, eyes thoughtful. He stood in the hall with his hands folded like a man in church, trying to remember the verse. "If there's a fuss tonight," he said, "watch the well." He said it not as a warning, but as a man quoting a shoreline to a green crew. Seraphine thanked him with a proper nod. "Thank you, sir," as if he had earned it new that day. He bowed a little, embarrassed and pleased both, and left by the kitchen door so the boards wouldn't think he'd forgotten her name. We took our places at twilight, which is when lies feel strongest and truth looks a little tired. I laid my blanket by the jamb, hat brim low, eyes on that painted 11. Still refusing, I told the door. "Now you can work for us." Ranger touched the scene with his nose, as if to sign his own name under mine. The first hour brought nothing but the lamp's long, patient breathing and a moth's muffled tink against glass. The second brought a mouse investigating the flower and leaving small calligraphy. Ranger allowed it professional courtesy. Near midnight, a thin glow hatched inside the keyhole like a worm thinking itself a star. The teacup gave a delicate ring from the far table. The skybox whispered. The ribbon of light on the closet crack trembled like a guilty throat. Calder mouthed 3, 2, 1, not to count down a rush, but to tune our bodies to the man's steps. Something metallic bumped and stilled. A hand sized the satchel strap in the parlor, found a dog on it, and reconsidered life choices. Then a white oval face, a cheap tin reflector set to catch lantern rows on the far wall like a bad moon, and behind it the thread twitched as if faith had put a string on china. I said to the dark, quiet as a church pew, "I've ridden with better phantoms than you." Ranger stepped very neatly on the thread near the baseboard. The ghost face broke at the chin, wobbled and died. A knee knocked wood. The bell tugged my ear. Calder moved then, not like a hero in a story, just like a decent man walking through a door he'd paid for with patience. The closet blew out a breath and yielded a shape that could have been any of 3 hired men. I'd seen drive Hale's wagons then, quick, unsatisfied with his own shadow. We didn't shout. Calder took the fellow by the sleeve and guided him into the lamplight. "You're done for the night," he said, as polite as a banker closing early. The man wilted not from fear, but from the long ache of somebody else's errands. Calder walked him to the porch and told him, plain as mail, to present himself in the morning. He nodded, grateful to be told what to do. We watched him go, the moon making a weak virtue of his hat. He wasn't my quarry. The man who hired him was. We cleaned the flour, reset the mirror, left the latch as we'd found it. We set the satchel conspicuous, then took it to bed with Calder instead. If there's any safer place for paper than under a good man's rib, I ain't met it. I told the house again we meant light. It creaked once, politely, as if to say it had heard and would carry that message down its old beams. Before sleep edges took me, I heard the far well cough a sound, like a throat clearing into stone. Ranger heard it too. He rose without sound and went to the back door and stood. I joined him. Moonlight wrote the yard in neat pale rows. The well cap sat black and low and honest. Still, the earth around it had a newly taut look, like a blanket tucked by a stranger. I put my hand on the dog's withers and felt a question traveling his bones to mine. When? Not if, not who. When I said, "Tomorrow, partner." He pressed his cheek to the door, once like a soldier touching a flag before moving out. At first light, we carried the seal head, the fob, and our notes to the courthouse. The clerk who should have had that little brass mouth looked like a man who discovered his own teeth missing that morning and was trying to suck soup without embarrassing himself. Calder asked him for the register. Names didn't match years. Gap smiled where filings should have sat. Hale's ink walked in late and wrong. We wrote it all down without crowing. On the way back, my boots said the word "well" with every board the porch gives you. Tonight, I told Seraphine, we keep our eyes on water. Her pretty mouth set in a brave line, and her cream dress caught the noon like a flag across a lost country. "Then let the water speak," she said. And if you think a sentence like that doesn't make a man stand taller, you haven't been a tired cowboy in a house that's come back to itself. By sundown, the yard had that hush a ranch gets when every rope is coiled and men are waiting on weather. We ate quick bread, beans, a sliver of pie Seraphine apologized for and didn't need to, and took our places like pews. Sheriff Calder at the back landing, me at the threshold of room 11, and Ranger drifting between posts like a thought that didn't want to be caught yet. I still refused to enter the room. That wasn't stubbornness for its own sake. It was bait hung just high enough to make a thief stretch for it. A stubborn man may win a staring contest with a door, but a greedy one never could. Greed blinks first, then reaches. I let the house hear my boots settle and the lamplight steady, and I let the liar, wherever he was, learn the rhythm of my breathing so he'd think I could be timed. The first hour peeled off clean. The second wrote faint print in the flour where a cautious heel had tested a board and retreated. Around 11, the pantry goat coughed twice and settled. At midnight, a cloud covered the moon and the house lost its edges for a count of 20. When the light came back thin as skim milk, the ribbon at the closet crack showed nothing. The bell wire lay slack and the keyhole stayed dark. But out back, the well coughed again. Ranger's ears rose like the handles of a bucket being pulled up from a deep well. We stepped outside with care. The yard was wide enough to shame paper. The well cap sat in its shallow square of stones like a short tomb. Calder touched my arm and pointed with his chin toward the south fence where the ground wore a new scuff, long and narrow, like somebody had dragged a plank in and out to teach the dirt obedience. I went to one knee. Ranger put his nose to the scuff, then lifted it toward the pasture and inhaled slow. He turned once and looked at me. I know his looks. That one means there is motion where stillness was, and it carries a smell that wants to hide. The old topographer had told us to watch the well. Tonight the well watched back. I set my palm to the iron and felt a whisper of vibration. Somewhere below, not far, a tool tapped stone with a rhythm a man uses when he thinks he's quiet. Calder moved to the west side and laid his ear to the bricks. A faint scrape came up steady. They're not in the shaft, he said. They're beside it. A tunnel, then. Our county has a habit of making second ways where first ways get crowded. We circled soft. At the far side of the pen, a patch of weeds lay pressed in a flatter shape than Goat could manage. I parted them with my boot and found a board, then a second, both laid to hide a mouth big enough to take a man. Air lifted from the hole and caught in my throat the way cellar air does, cool and old, with a quiver of lamp oil. Ranger sneezed once, insulted on behalf of air done wrong. Calder eased down on his haunches and held the lantern sideways, low, to keep the light from traveling too far. The shadows told us enough without bragging. Ranger, I whispered, and let my hand fall to his shoulder. He looked up, then over, then down that black. He does not fear holes. He fears harm, which is different. He slid forward, forepaws to the lip, and peered with the stillness cats pretend to. I unclipped his lead, the strip of leather he wears only when a place thinks it can own him. Bring what's moving, I told him. He blinked slow. That's his yes, but not stupid. We let the tunnel sing itself a verse. The scrape turned to a shuffle, and the shuffle to a drag. A man cursed under his breath, and another hushed him like you hush a baby and a chair at the same time. Then they paused. Light, one said. Wait it out. We waited them waiting us. Moonlight gave the yard back by degrees, and a coited yipped twice down by the river as if to applaud. When the quiet had convinced itself it was alone, the scrape came again, closer. I smelled cheap kerosene and a wool coat that had seen too many back doors. Calder put his hand on my arm. Let's not get noble, he said. Let the dog do the thing he came into this world to do. I nodded. Ranger looked me square in the heart and then slipped into that hole with a softness that would shame silk. You'd think 100-pound shepherd would clatter like chain in a tin shed. Ranger moves like regret quiet, precise, and already halfway gone when you turn to name it. I lay flat, cheek to the boards, and listened. A man said, "Hey," in a voice small with surprise. Another made the sound a lantern makes if you hit it with your wrist. Then water talked, just a whisper, as if disturbed by a careful paw. And the next breath, something nudged my fingertips from below, leather, wet, and round at one end. I took it and brought it up. It was a cylinder canvas wrapped, tarred, and tied with a brass cap at each end. I knew it by feel. A watertight map case, the sort men trust more than canvas sacks or tin lockboxes. It had been corked, then dipped in tar, then wrapped in canvas like a mother wraps a baby against a March wind. I put it to my ear. Paper whispered inside it, thin and eager. Ranger came up after, chin and whiskers damp, eyes bright like he'd just fetched Sunday out of a ditch. He shook once, then remembered himself and did it away from my boots. Down in the dark, a man cursed on a longer note and shoved at earth. Come on, he hissed. Move. The shoving dragged the mouth wider, which made it falter. Word came back toward him in the form of Sheriff Calder's voice, cool as old beer. If you break ground on a lady's land without paper, you better have wings. I'd advise you to stand where my badge can see you. The fellow in the hole did not take advice. He lunged. Dirt crumbled, boards yelped, and a long pale hand reached up, open, empty, plotting for my sleeve. I took the hand, because a decent man doesn't let another fall into his own foolishness, and hauled. He came up coughing earth and disrespect. He had the notch missing at one heel, and a smear of glow dust under his collar, where he'd leaned at doors that didn't want him. He looked at Calder and found a badge. He looked at me and found a man whose patience stretched to the edge of decency. He looked at Ranger and decided to keep breathing politely. A second shape shifted below. Leave it, a voice rasped. Take the little case and run the fence. I held up the tube. This little case? The voice stilled so quick, the night got bigger. You fools, he said at last, almost admiring. You brought the dog. Smart of us, I said. Dumb of you. That voice came up the hole, then in the form of Morton Hale's breath, careful and coached. He did not show his face, not yet. Men like him prefer to be voices until papers appear. You misunderstand me, he said. I merely hire men to protect town assets from the dangers of rumor and trespass. That tube is sensitive property. Allow me to relieve you of it, and we can settle accounts in a civilized room. He had a way of making the words civilized room sound like a gallows with wallpaper. Seraphine's voice came from behind us, steady as a hand on rain. The only civilized room here is the one my house keeps, she said. She stood at the porch edge, cream dress a small clean fire in the night, hair dark and pinned, mouth set the way a woman's mouth sets when she has folded grief straight and put it away for later. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She simply watched men do what men do and kept the record with her eyes. Calder lifted the tube just enough for Moon to strike the brass cap. This comes with us to a judge, he said, and the man who speaks from holes can follow under his own power or under mine. The first fellow, the one I'd hauled, had already chosen to stand. He lifted his empty hands like a man needing rain and said he preferred the front door to any tunnel. Ranger sat beside him to agree. The hole kept its silence for 3 long breaths. Ben Hale's voice receded a little, not brave enough to turn its back, not foolish enough to climb. You're making a spectacle of what ought to be a ledger entry, he said. Think of your reputation, Sheriff. Think of your guests, Miss Vale. Seraphine's answer was the kind you sew into a quilt so grandkids can learn from it without knowing they did. I am thinking of my guests, she said. I am thinking of my water. Something shifted deeper boards, maybe, or conscience. Then came the sound I'd been expecting since the first draft crept under room 11's door. Feet retreating, quick and quiet, the kind cowards use to make modesty of escape. A minute later, the koidig yipped once, and the night stitched itself back together where it had been pulled. We walked our prisoner to the porch. Calder sat him on the top step with a kindness that made it sting. I handed the tube to Seraphine. She turned it in her hands, the brass bright against the cream of her dress. And I swear the old house straightened its shoulders under her like a horse that has recognized the right rider. She carried it to the parlor table where the satchel had slept and set the tube beside the packet. 2 old companions laying down their traveling weight. Calder went to the well and set the boards back, not to hide guilt, but to keep goats and good men from dropping into other people's holes. He patted the stones once, the way a man thanks a gate. Ranger, who believes in praise, trotted a small circle, like a child who has been told he did right and does not know where to put joy. He finally placed it at Seraphine's shoe and sat, chest proud and quiet. Dawn took a deep breath and pushed a ribbon of rose along the pasture fence. The prisoner dozed against duty. I poured coffee, and Seraphine took one swallow and smiled a tired little smile that still looked pretty, because honest smiles always do. You spoke a truth once, I told the house, softer than coffee steam. Let's finish it by noon. We went back to town when the judge's window lit yellow. The clerk gaped his way through his own records, then remembered his job and brought out a book with a good spine. Calder laid the packet and the tube on the desk while I stood with my hands behind my back so my fists wouldn't speak for me. Papers met papers. Seals introduced each other. The judge read long and slow. When he finished, he took off his spectacles and looked at Seraphine as if she were a new kind of weather he wanted to keep. Miss Vale, he said softly, the law is of the opinion that your rights run strong and clean. What was hidden in walls and holes now stands where men can read it. This court will recognize your claim to water and to any lawful mineral brine arising therefrom. Any party disputing such claim is welcome to bring a better paper. I do not expect one. He put his spectacles back on like a man holstering an old friend. Before we left, Calder asked leave to place the tube in the packet in evidence under seal. The judge nodded and wrote an order in a slow, careful hand. He added a line that said any revenues arising from lawful leases would apportion first to repairs of the Vale property and second to a fund for workers harmed by recent misadventures. I liked that word. It lets a town be decent without needing to hold a parade. The clerk read the order out loud, and the room felt different when the words were air instead of ink. A feeling like rain that hasn't fallen yet, but will. We stepped out into noon that had decided to like us. Seraphine stood in that light, looking 10 degrees brighter than any white paint ever made. Calder shook my hand without looking at it. "You were right about daylight," he said. "There ain't a ghost in the territory that can stand it." I said, because I couldn't help myself, "Ghosts don't sign ledgers." He smiled and said, "I'd make a poor poet and a decent neighbor." Ranger leaned against my leg, as if to say I had done one thing, he had done 9, and the house had done the rest by deciding not to be bullied anymore. We rode back slow. At the gate, Seraphine paused and looked toward room 11. The number on the door, 11, didn't look so bossy now. She touched the frame with 2 fingers and said, "We keep the room." I nodded. "We keep the story," I added. "And the water," she said. "And the water," I agreed. That evening, as we set supper, I found the goat asleep under the table, like a man who had stayed up too late for justice. Ranger gave him a sniff of forgiveness. The lamp burned steady as a heart that had learned what it was good for. I lifted my cup toward the threshold I still hadn't crossed and said the line I'd been holding in my pocket for 3 days. There ain't a ghost anywhere that can face daylight. The house seemed to smile, the way timber smiles when it stops listening for lies and starts listening for footsteps that belong. Morning came honest and slow, the way a good horse steps into cold water careful, certain, unafraid. We rolled back from town with the judge's order folded neat in sheriff, Calder's satchel, and the courthouse smell still clinging to the leather like chalk. Seraphine rode beside me on the wagon bench, posture tidy as a fence line, cream dress bright against the raw boards, dark hair pinned smooth so her neck caught the sun like polished stone. Ranger trotted ahead at easy pace, and every dozen yards he looked over his shoulder as if he were counting us like cattle going through a gate. I kept thinking about that first night and the brass number on the panel that breathed at me, and about the words I had said out loud to steady my hands. The cowboy refused to enter the room. You can live a long time under a sentence like that and never be ashamed of it. Pride can tip a man into foolishness. Caution can steady him into truth. I held the line so the dog could do the brave part, and now Ranger's nose had turned a hallway theater into paper with teeth. Folks around here like to say, "The nose knows." That morning, the ledger agreed. When we turned in under the cottonwood and the boarding house showed through the dust, the porch looked taller by an inch, like worry had been planed off its joists. 2 farmhands from downriver stood respectful, with caps in hand, pretending to admire the goat while they waited for noon pie and news. The goat knocked a dented tub silly, and then studied the clang as if it were a tune he might hum later. Seraphine laughed, a quick bright bell, and the house seemed to lift its shoulders and stand straighter for it. Inside, we spread the thin blue map on the parlor table with the care you give a first cry, and Calder laid the judge's order next to it. The words weren't fancy, but they held like seasoned timber. Recognition of rights to water rising from Blue Mesa and to lawful brine that came with it. Custody of the packet and the tarred tube. Direction that first revenues fix the veiled place and second look after men hurt by misadventures the court didn't care to praise. You could feel the language sit down inside the house like an old aunt who finally accepted a chair. She had been refusing out of pride. Ranger set his chin on the table edge and exhaled until one corner of the order lifted and settled again. He wore that quiet working dog pride that says, "I did my part because it was my part, not for clapping." I scratched his ruff and told him he had earned a bone and the right to forget every bad smell in 3 townships. He blinked slow. "That meant I'll take the bone and keep the smells. They're useful." By afternoon, the house hummed. Neighbors came gentle and steady, each bringing something small to trade for a story eggs in a kerchief, a jar of chokecherry jam, a spool of wire saved from a broken trellis, a bent horseshoe that once lucked a plow clear of a buried rock. Word ran ahead of them the way word does. A ghost put to bed by daylight and a dog. Water to be sold honest with a signed cut for the land it crossed. Women wore clean aprons. Men had hat lines on their foreheads like rings left by honest glasses set down on Sunday tables. I thought of Morton Hawley and did not feel cruel. I felt tired, the way a fence feels after catching a bull all night and then watching a rope do the easy part at sunrise. Men like him don't shiver until paper turns to light, and we had done that. I didn't say his name unless asked. When asked, I said, "He can read like the rest of us." That was sermon enough. Toward evening, Sheriff Calder tapped the map with his knuckle. "We'll need a clean survey," he said. "Not string pulled by rumor, boots that know mud." The old topographer came before we could send word, hat in both hands, eyes bright and ashamed at once. "Miss Vale," he said, "if you'll let an old mapman finish what younger me left under the snow." Ranger walked over and rested his muzzle against the man's knee for the length of a breath. That passed for a letter of reference. Seraphine nodded, and the man set to work with pencil and rule, measuring the winter pipe and the reach of the seep like he was reading a psalm and didn't want to skip a word. Supper turned the house into a bright pot with stories simmering. Seraphine kept 2 stoves going and set ham on a blue plate, spooned beans like a woman laying down proof that hunger can be cured by steady hands. Men from the co-op came with clean ledgers and dusty hats. The school teacher came to witness, because a town believes ink more when someone who teaches children nods. We spread a sheet on the porch rail as a desk. Calder read each clause in the co-op paper out loud, and we signed slow. A slice for repairs, a slice for wages, a slice for the school roof when weather grows mean, a slice for the bank to hold without tricks. The teacher dotted her, eyes like fence staples, neat and certain. Ranger made his rounds, solemn as a junior deacon. Pantry, goat pretending to be an onion sack. Porch, milk pail flashing a coin of sun. Hallway, brass 11, newly ordinary. He stopped at the jamb where the seam had been, nose to paint, and breathed a long, even breath that said the trick was gone and the wood knew it. Then he looked up at me with a question tucked behind his eyes. "Well?" I set my palm to the frame like a man at a horse's neck and answered, "I told you I wouldn't cross until it was our choice. Today it is." We didn't make a parade, heel then toe. Over I went not as a conqueror, but as a friend who finally learned the names of the boards. The room held its temper the way a polite guest holds a teacup. The sconce was only brass, now that its secret had been unpinned. On the table sat the teacup that had spoken by string. It kept quiet as a well-behaved child who'd been taught the right way to sit. Ranger hopped the threshold, shook his collar once, circled the rug like he was counting stitches, then lay down with his paws crossed the way a librarian rests between borrowers. He watched the simply closed door, not because it threatened him anymore, but because watching is how a shepherd loves a family. Seraphine stood outside the jam, fingertips on paint, not stepping in yet. That felt right. The wrong had lived here most with us, and the house knew whose footsteps had guarded it. Calder rapped the jam once, a judge closing court. "Done," he said. "If this room ever learns to lie again, I'll have the wall sign a bond." He smiled, not for show, but the kind you can hear loosen a man's spine. He left us to make peace with plaster that had been told it was haunted and had only been tired. We ate late. The men from the co-op took second helpings and then carried a box of shingles up the kitchen ladder without being asked. Seraphine didn't cry when the first new slate landed. She just breathed deeper and let the wind know it had 2 roofs to play with. Hale's carriage went by once on the road and did not stop. That was blessing enough for a while. When the stars showed clean, the neighbors peeled away in pairs of lantern light. The topographer stayed to finish a neat copy, today's date in its corner. He marked the winter pipe and labeled it the way a teacher writes the right answer on a slate. Seraphine read over his shoulder with pleasure that didn't swell. She isn't a swelling woman. She just gets truer. It might have ended there and would have been plenty, but old houses like to offer small benedictions when you treat them right. Near midnight, after the last pie plate had dried and the goat had picked his table leg for a pillow, I walked Ranger down the hall one more time. The lamp was low. The air lay gentle. The brass 11 did not look like a warning anymore. It looked like what numbers look like when they forget math and remember, they were carved by hands. Inside, the candle Seraphine had left on the little table for company caught a lick of air and woke itself without help. I watched the wick go from a coal to a thin, steady flame like a reed calling a bird. I can't explain that in court language, and I don't aim to. It looked less like a trick and more like a thank you from boards that had been listened to instead of bullied. Easy, I told Ranger. He didn't bark or stand. He just watched the small light, then looked up at me and blinked slow, which is dog for that's all right. I closed the door gentle, not to keep anything in or out, just to give the room the courtesy it had given us when he was trying too hard to act. I put my palm on the paint and felt only wood made honest by time and the woman's keeping. Seraphine stood there with a ledger under her arm and a dish towel over her shoulder and a look that could hold a county together. "Well?" she asked. "The room's a room," I said, "and the secret turned into a river with your name on it." Ranger thumped his tail once, a signature made out of fur. On the porch, the night carried low talk and a fiddle from down the lane. Calder had his boots on the rail, badge catching star bits like a net. He didn't ask what I'd seen, because he didn't need to. He said, "We sign with the co-op at first bell papers proper, shares clear, wages fair." Seraphine said, "We fixed the east fence." I said, "And the hinge on the pantry door, before that goat learns a new trick." Ranger walked to the blue bowl and looked into it as if to remind the world that a bowl worth having should never go dry. I thought again about that first refusal and how good it felt to keep it until the time was right. The cowboy refused to enter the room that was the start. The dog revealed a secret 200 million by town talk, which is how folks count lightning. Maybe they'll remember another number too. One door respected until it answered. One woman's name written where it belonged. One dog's nose telling air how to behave. That's enough arithmetic for a life. We turned down the lamps and left the door open to let cool pass to cool. Ranger took night watch at the step and folded his paws like a man lacing fingers. I laid my blanket in the hall the way I had on the first night and felt the difference in my bones, the boards no longer holding back a lie, only holding up a story that had decided to stay. Seraphine checked her latches and her damper and wrote the day's last line in her book. Calder hummed a hymn I didn't know and then forgot the words on purpose because the tune had already done its job. Sleep came like a gate you find in the dark by knowing where the post ought to be. Before I went under, I said it one more time, not as a dare or a charm, but as a fact proved by daylight and a good dog. There ain't a ghost anywhere can stand daylight. And if one ever tries again, he better bring better theater than gutline and glow dust, and he better be ready to lose to a shepherd with his nose on straight. Morning followed morning with a kind of steadiness that makes a year. At first bell, the co-op men returned with shirts still damp from the pump and faces open as ledger paper. We set the contracts on the same porch rail and let fresh ink claim the grain. Calder read every promise plain, so even the goat could have understood if he had paused his chewing. Leases to be bid each spring, the winter pipe to be fenced and marked, a fixed share to repair fences and roofs, a fixed share to pay wages clean, a slice to the school and the widow fund. No signature worth less than the hand that wrote it. We signed slow. The school teacher dotted her, eyes as neat as fence staples. The old topographer witnessed with a hand steady enough to make a level jealous. When it was done, folks didn't cheer. They breathed. A long, easy breath went around the yard like wind you can't see, proven by leaves. Men who hadn't been to the Vale place in a year walked the fence and talked about rails like they were reading scripture. Two young hands too proud to be thanked set new planks over the goat's crawl holes and pretended they were just leaning on hammers to admire the sky. Seraphine wrote receipts in her small, careful hand and tucked a ribbon in her ledger so the page would open tomorrow where the proof lived. Before supper, I lifted the tarred tube and the old packet and set them together on the hall table under the blue bowl. Evidence, Calder said, half to himself, half to the boards. I crouched and tapped the bundle with a knuckle. Ranger understood, because that dog speaks paper as well as he speaks trail. He pressed his nose against the oilcloth, then nudged the packet forward until it touched the edge of light where a neighbor could see it from the porch. It was a small thing, but it landed in folks the way a church bell lands proof first, comfort after. More than one man nodded without meaning to. A woman said, "Well then," and wiped her hands on her apron as if she had set a worry down. Hale didn't show. Maybe he will learn to fix his own roof somewhere south. I won't wish him bad weather. A man can be wrong and still find daylight later, and this county has room for resurrections if you do the work heavy. At sundown, Seraphine carried out a plate and sat with me on the top step where we could see the lane. She held herself with that neat strength she keeps for hard days. "Bill," she said, soft enough that only the dog could have carried the echo, "you never entered that room until the house did the inviting." I said the truth back. "Ma'am, some doors don't open right unless you let them keep their pride." She smiled at that, a small white smile, and looked toward the pasture where the winter pipe ran under, and a little proud of its own stillness. The old topographer sat at the table and drew one more line, a tiny symbol where the seat met the well shelf, and Ranger watched the pencil like a cat watches a fly. The man put the pencil down and thanked Seraphine for trusting an old mapman with young people's futures. She told him kindness owed him nothing and paid him just the same. When the lanterns burned low, we walked the yard in a slow square. I checked the gate latches. Calder checked the locks. Seraphine checked the stove. Ranger checked each of us. The air had that sweet iron smell you get when a day agrees with itself. Just before we went in, the fiddler down the lane leaned into a tune that sounded like water over shale. I never knew the name of that song. I didn't need to. We turned in late and slept early, which is to say, we rested like people who had earned it. If I dreamed, it was of planks laid square and wire tight, of light belling out of a window and blowing the dust out of a lie. Ranger sighed once and pushed his feet into my blanket, and I let him have the corner. I wanted him near the threshold, and he wanted me near the dog. We met halfway, and the house held the rest. Before sunrise, the papers lay flat as kept promises, and the house breathed like a barn full of grain in winter.